Hello, and welcome to the lecture on creating a lesson plan. This is the lecture in week 12 that you should listen to prior to creating your lesson plan. Don't go ahead and try to do it without it because the information contained in this lecture, you'll need to do so. First of all, I've created a blank template in this week's Learning Module folder. You should download that and print it and so you can follow along during this lecture. Later, you'll use the same template to create your lesson plan. So pause the lecture here if you need to, and make sure you print that template. I'm assuming now that you have the template in front of you. And if you look at the top of it, you'll see sort of a header section. At the top, it'll say title, concept topic, grade level, teacher, etc. There'll be a box for the New York State Common Core Standards and student learning outcomes. Let's take a look separately at that header information. We're going to construct an imaginary lesson plan in this lesson so that you can see the types of things that you need to input. I'm going to create a lesson plan on Where Are the Wild Things, a book centered around a book by Maurice Sendak, Where the Wild Things Are. And the topic or concept is remembering key details in a text. The grade level this might be appropriate for might be kindergarten, and we put my name here. So you'll fill out similar information when you're doing your lesson plan template. For the learning outcomes, you need to reference the New York State Common Core Standards. We've talked about those in this course before. I've provided you the link here in this file. I've also provided the language standards and the math standards on the course site, so you can reference those. Here's a screenshot of the reading standards for literature K-5, and so you can follow across the thread for kindergartners, grade 1 students, and grade 2 students, the key ideas, the key concepts here. The top literature standard addresses understanding key ideas and details, for example, and the second one addresses craft and structure. For my standard, I'm going to want them to be able to understand key details about a text. And so the way I'm going to write that on my lesson plan is, if you look at the bottom of this, Reading Standards for Literature K-5, Standard 1, Kindergarten, with prompting and support, ask and answer questions about key details in a text. And if you look up at number 1, you can see that's where I derived that language in the kindergarten column and under standard number 1. So when you're writing your standard in your lesson plan, please be sure to say whether it's a reading standard, a math standard, whatever it is, the body of standards it comes from for literature K-12, the standard number, and the age level or grade level, kindergarten, that it's appropriate for. And again, this is the standard that my lesson will be addressing. The student learning outcomes consist of the things that you would like students to be able to do. They relate to the Common Core Standards, but these are actually the actions that you want to be able to see in students' behavior. What will the students learn? The goals that or the outcomes should be age appropriate and based on the standards, usually one goal addressing each of the standards. Each goal should start with students will be able to. I refer to that as SWBAT, or students will be able to. And you use an observable, measurable verb. Think about it. You can't see a student identifying, describing, discussing, listing, explaining, reading. Or rather, you can see those behaviors, but you cannot see learning or understanding or comprehending. So student learning outcomes should be visible behaviors. So you shouldn't say students will learn. You should say instead students will describe, students will identify, students will explain. The goal should address various levels of Bloom's taxonomy, which you read about again this week in your text. So here we have my student learning outcomes. Students will be able to identify, again, that action verb that you can see, the following important details in a fictional text. Who is the main character? Why does he want to leave home? Where does he go? How does he get there? What happens to him there? When does he get a chance to leave? And how does he get back home? So again, the key word here is they will be able to identify important details. I can see them doing that. I can measure that to some degree. The materials section means what do you need for the lesson? You might need books, props, supplies, or anything else that you need to make the lesson happen. You should list. In my lesson, I will need the book Where the Wild Things Are by Marie Sendak, a big paper bag, pictures of friendly monsters cut up in the bag, and I will also need what I'm calling the 6W detective cards, which will become clearer in a moment. The anticipatory set or introduction is what you do to engage students in the lesson. That is, how will you introduce it? Something fun. Sometimes we call this the hook. It should be exciting, fun, and interesting. Too many teachers begin their lessons with, today we're going to read a story. And after hearing that for about the 100th time, students sort of tune out to that. But if you can think of more clever ways, something that will engage their interest, this is what we mean by the anticipatory set or introduction. In my introduction for my lesson, I'm going to do the following. Before the lesson, I'll place cut up pictures of friendly monsters into a large bag, and I'll also put the book in a bag. I'll ask the children to sit on a rug. I'm going to tell them that we're going to read a book that is in the bag and that most of them have probably read it today. Tell them the bag also contains clues about what the book is. And tell them I will show them the pictures one by one and see if you can guess what the book is. One by one, I'll pull the pictures out. Each time I'll stop and ask the children if they can guess yet what the book is. Hopefully the children will guess it, but if not, after I run out of pictures, I'll pull the book out of the bag. So this is an introduction rather than saying we're going to read a story. I'm trying to pique the students' interest by having them guess what the story is, and it's probably a book most of them will be familiar with, so it's likely that at least one student will guess the book. Now I'm choosing a book with which they're familiar for a very specific reason. I don't want them to have to concentrate on learning the story. I want them to concentrate instead on remembering the details, which is cognitively less demanding than learning the story for the first time. And so for the procedures, here's what I'm going to be doing. Procedures should be listed, by the way, one by one and numbered. Once the book is known, pull out 6 word cards. Who, what, where, when, why, and how will be written on them. Remind the children that these word cards are like detectives. They help us understand what is going on in the story. Now, this lesson assumes prior knowledge with word cards. And if there is prior knowledge, you should indicate that in your lesson plan. In this lesson, students will have worked with the word cards before in other situations, but not necessarily with a book. The third step is I'm going to tell the students that I'm going to read a story and stop every few pages asking a detective word question. Students should listen closely so they will be able to answer the question. So for example, I might read 2 or 3 pages and I might say, who is the main character in this story? Or I might say, why does Max want to leave home? Also, I'm going to tell the students at the beginning that I'll be asking them to come up with their own detective word questions. I'm going to read the story, stopping every 3 to 4 pages, And I'm going to mix up the types of questions. So I'll ask a few whens, a few wheres, a few whos, a few whats, a few whys, etc. It's important when I'm responding to students to involve others in the discussion instead of just the recitative one teacher, one student dialogue that goes on in the classroom. You can build classroom discussion, especially between students, by asking talk moves questions such as who agrees or disagrees with what he said and why? Or can anyone add to what she said? I'm going to prompt the students to ask and answer their own questions. So after I've asked a couple of questions, I might say, does anyone else have a detective question? And students would be encouraged to come up with questions on their own, and then classmates could respond to that, which will also prompt classroom discussion. You need to consider adaptations or differentiation for your lesson. And when you consider differentiation, you're actually considering how will you adapt your lesson for any of the following populations. Students with special learning needs, for example, students with reading disabilities. Gifted students, students who are advanced and already may understand or cognitively have mastered the content. Here, students with hearing or visual issues or other types of physical handicaps or disabilities. In my lesson, I'm going to provide two adaptations. For students with reading disabilities, I'm going to provide word cards that have the word and a picture that helps the student remember the word. This is a good practice anyway in kindergarten because some of your students will be non-readers at this point. For gifted students, I'm going to direct specific higher level, or your book calls them higher order thinking questions, such as what motivated Max to put on the wolf suit in the first place? This is a little more cognitively challenging than a lower order or basic comprehension question. Your closure should discuss how you end the lesson. Sometimes it could be a summary. So this is what we did today, boys and girls. Sometimes it can be a reflection or encouraging them to think about what they've learned. That's what we call metacognition, and research suggests this is one of the most effective things you can do to promote learning. It can even be, in fact, a simple transition to a related activity. My lesson's closure is to remind students that snack time is coming up and that I would like them to try an activity during snack time. I want them to secretly think of a story they like, and I would give them time to think of that. I would say, don't share the story yet. But then during snack time, find someone who knows that story. And then use the 6 detective question words to ask each other questions and answer those questions about the story. Before I release them, I would have at least one and maybe more than one student repeat the instructions I've just given to ensure comprehension of the instructions among the group. And then I would transition them to snack time. It's a little unusual to have the assessment occur during another period of the day, but I think in this case it could work. For my assessment, or how will I know learning takes place, I'm going to have to think of a way to review my outcome and to think about formal or informal assessment and how do I know that learning has taken place. For my lesson, the outcome was students will be able to identify the following important details in a fictional text. I could informally assess this during snack time as students question and answer each other about fictional texts they remember. Can students use their knowledge of the text and the 6 detective question words to correctly identify important details in a fictional text? It may surprise you to learn that this type of informal assessment occurs in classroom and is perfectly acceptable. We are all too used to thinking of formal quizzes, tests, and graded projects as assessment. And that can be assessment as well. We certainly need some of that type of assessment. But much of the kind of assessment that goes on in classrooms is informal. If, for example, we gathered the group together in snack time and students were unable to use the what, when, where, who, why, and how questions to recall details of a text, I might know as a teacher I need to focus on that a little more and provide some additional lessons on that in the future. The last part of your lesson plan that you should consider is the resource section. You may not have any resources, but if you go to the internet and find a lesson plan, it's very important that you provide a reference for that lesson plan. It's perfectly acceptable to do this and to modify it in the ways and put it in our lesson template in the ways that I've described in this lecture. If you do use a lesson plan and you don't provide a reference, that is considered plagiarism. Here you can see that I am indicating here that I retrieved this through Jumpstart Lesson Plans. The ND means no date. Sometimes you'll see a date on a website and sometimes you won't. If you don't see it, you should put ND. And then the title of the lesson using the 5W detective words and retrieve from and the website that I retrieved it from. Now I have to indicate in interest of transparency here, this lesson did not actually come from this website. I made it up. However, I'm pretending so that you can see how you would format a resource reference from the website. When you're finished, please proofread your lesson plan to make sure it's spelled correctly, formatted correctly, and everything looks good. Save the final version to your computer and upload the final version to the assignment link in this week's folder. This is worth 15% of your final grade, and I've skipped the discussion posting this week to allow you some extra time to focus on it. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to email. Otherwise, I'll look forward to reading your excellent lessons. Thank you.